Okay. Okay. All right. Hello, Alex. Tell me why you wanted to make a documentary about Peter Bradley.
Well, I met Peter and he just seemed like a great subject. I had heard a little bit about his background, which was intriguing,
Hmm.
and seen a little of his artwork, which also just struck me as very cinematic. It really happened because Peter and I live like a 6-minute drive from one another in a small town
Hmm.
in the Hudson Valley, Saugerties. And I met Peter through a local art gallerist, Robert Langdon, who has a tiny little storefront gallery where he shows just local artists. And in the summer of 2019, Robert had managed to get a relationship with Peter, I think through Peter's wife, and showed a handful of his paintings. And through first my wife meeting Peter and then my daughter helping out at the gallery, I got pulled in and asked Robert for an introduction.
Interesting.
Mm.
And I like how you said his paintings are cinematic. I would love for you to elaborate on that.
Well, for people that haven't seen the film, Peter's technique does he doesn't use a brush or
Mm.
hold any pen or anything in his hand. He he mixes paint, water-based paint, with large quantities of more water in buckets, and he sort of throws buckets of paint out onto the canvas. And these will pool up and drip and run. They become very alive for a period of time until they dry. And so there's this temporal aspect to what he does with the paintings that is just very cool. And I would be with him and film him putting paint down, and he'd be like, well, okay, now we need to let it dry. And he'd
Mhm.
come back to it a day, 2, 3, 4 days later and put more down. And when I'd see it the next time, it would look totally different. So it was always a surprise. And yeah, just the whole action of how he
Mm.
works and the way the paint would kind of run and like watercolors almost.
Mm. I found him very particular. Like he has certain ways of doing things, like how he works. He doesn't read books.
Right.
He met Paul McCartney, didn't give a shit because he known Miles Davis. Like he definitely was a guy who saw things a particular way.
Mm.
So how would you describe his personality?
Well, I have to keep in mind that I met the 79-year-old Peter Bradley, and
Right.
so I'm sure he had softened quite a bit around the edges and mellowed out a bit. And
Hmm.
he was just pretty much the guy you see on camera. I mean, to me, very open and charismatic and charming in a way. He's just the kind of person you want to be around, and I think that has a lot to do with the success he attained early on in his career. He's just the kind of person you want to be around. Um, part of that, you know, is tied to this really intense self-confidence that was ingrained in him by his mother. He was adopted as an infant, but his adoptive mother really instilled in him. She always told him, "You're special," and he internalized that from a young age. I'm special. I can do whatever I want to do, and the hell with anybody that you know doesn't like what I'm doing or thinks differently. So.
Yeah. How much time would you say you spent with him making this documentary?
At one point I counted up, I went through all the media to see how many different days I had been to film with him. And there were like 40 different days that I was there, often just partial days. I would go for, a couple, 2, 3 hours at a time,
Hmm.
sometimes a little longer. That was the
Wow.
nice thing about it, is that all the gear I shot it was behind me. The computer I cut it on, I'm talking to you on, it's in a shed behind my house. And so it was easy to call Peter and
Hmm.
say, what are you doing tomorrow? Okay, I'll come over, throw the stuff in the car and just hang out for a while. And and I left stuff there when I knew I was going to be back the next day.
Mm,
I left some equipment just sitting on their floor until I came back. So it was very casual, and there was really no one else coming around. That was, I think Peter was happy for me to be there, and in a way to have the attention, and have someone to talk to. Because he doesn't really go anywhere. He doesn't have a desire to really go anywhere. So if people want to see him, they have to come up here and find him, to visit. And yeah, it was great just getting to know Peter and have that intimacy. And it was always just the two of us, one on one. I'd stick a mic on him, and
mm.
we would just go. So it was very cool.
Very cool. Um, so we mentioned earlier the whole Paul McCartney thing. Tell me about the relationship between jazz music and his work.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I mean, jazz is really a B story in the film.
Mm,
His love of jazz started as a child,
mm,
growing up in this small town in Pennsylvania, which was not far from Pittsburgh. And his father worked on the train line, and the town Connellsville was a place where the two different train lines came together. So often people would have to spend the night in Connellsville to catch the train going to Pittsburgh. This is in
mm,
the 40s and 50s,
mm,
and so the dad met a lot of these Black jazz musicians, that were passing through and would say, "Hey, you can stay at our house." So
mm,
Peter, from the time he was a child, was meeting Miles Davis, Art Blakey, some other A-list musicians of that era, and was getting records from them. And at the same time, was encouraged by his mother, like other kids are kind of forced to sit at the piano and practice.
mm,
Peter was strongly encouraged to draw every day and
mm,
paint, and he would always listen to music when he did it, and
mm.
that continues to this day. He says in the film, "I can't paint unless I have music." And it's not always jazz, sometimes classical, sometimes some rock and roll. He's got pretty eclectic tastes. I saw a Led Zeppelin CD on the shelf in the studio, Clapton, and um, I'm losing my train of thought, but yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
music is integral to the way he works, and his whole is out. Oh, what I was gonna say is Peter has what they call synesthesia, where he hears sound as colors, like he sees sound as
Right.
different colors, and that translates onto the canvases, and the rhythms and different colors that he'll use are inspired by whatever he's listening to at the time.
Very interesting. And I love like it goes back to like his particular way of like looking at things. He's just like I remember him sort of saying like that makes sense. Like you see a color when you hear something. Like that's just something people do.
Yeah, well, to him, that's just it. I mean,
Yeah.
it's very, but for me, like, I've never experienced that. I can
Mm.
kind of get it, and I hope people get it when they watch it, when he talks about it. And we're looking at some examples of paintings that you're like, oh, yeah, I can see like a trumpet is like a brighter kind of color, and the bass would be a deeper sort of tone. Yeah, I kind of wish I had it, but then again, if I did, I think it would be really distracting every time I was listening to something.
For sure. So I want to talk about the score of this movie or this documentary. You had Javon Jackson,
Yeah, Javon Jackson.
Javon Jackson, okay, Javon and her quintet. And Javon did some music in Malcolm X, which I'm a huge fan of. Great movie.
Oh,
So I would love to know a little bit more about your first conversation with her about what you wanted from the score.
well, there's a great story with Javon and Peter too, that they've known each other since the late 1980s, when Javon
Wow.
was a young musician right out of Berklee College of Music. He started working with Art Blakey and the Jazz Messengers.
Yeah.
And so, because Peter was close with Art Blakey, he was going to their shows all the time, and got to be friends, with Javon. In recent years, they haven't been in touch so frequently, but it was Peter's wife, Deborah, actually, that had the idea that Javon could do the music. And she didn't tell me this, but she invited me to a concert in Poughkeepsie, about 45 minutes from here, a year and a half ago, and I saw the show. It was amazing. It's totally that style of music, kind of classic jazz combo. And afterwards, she introduced us, and then she said, I've got this idea.
Mhm.
And Javon hadn't seen the film yet, but I thought it was a fantastic idea. And then Javon watched the film and loved it. Actually told me that seeing the film was a revelation for him because he'd never talked with Peter about art. He'd only talked to him about music because that's Peter's passion. And
Mhm.
so Javon heard that the temporary music tracks I used, which were just lifted from all these CDs I pulled out of
Mhm.
Peter's house and studio, Miles Davis and Coltrane and Mingus. I mean, you name it, all this great stuff, which of course I couldn't afford to use. And Javon got it. He kind of internalized it, and then and came out with compositions of his own that in some cases reflected the temp, but in other cases were just his own thing that work even better. It's amazing. He hit it out of the park, Javon. It's fantastic, and I think the soundtrack is really kind of a character in the film. There's a lot of music.
I'd say so.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I'd love to do a soundtrack album if we could get some money, that they could go back in and record some longer versions of some
that'd
of
be
these
cool.
tracks. It'd be so cool.
Get a little CD out there.
Yeah.
Definitely. All right. So, how do you describe Peter Bradley's visual style? Huh. You can
That's a
just
great
lump it in
question.
like abstracts, but like how would
Yeah,
you
I
like
mean, yeah,
elaborate?
I mean,
Yeah,
he's a purely abstract artist.
yeah.
Peter was belonged to a group in the kind of early 70s, late 60s to mid 70s that they called the color field school of painting,
Mm,
which I've learned was considered the third wave of abstract expressionism, which started by Pollock and some of these other people just after World War II,
mm,
um, and kind of championed by this famous art critic Clement Greenberg, who kind of discovered Pollock, and some others, and who Peter got to be very close to through a friend of his, Kenneth Noland, who was a much more successful and well-known painter in the 60s.
mm.
So yeah, purely abstract. He doesn't want anything to do with figurative work. Although in the film you'll see, I was fortunate. I actually drove to Detroit. Peter had gone to art school in Detroit, um, like 1959 to 62, and there's a family there. They're still close friends of his. He had given a lot of his student artwork to this woman who lived across the street from where he lived with a foster sister of his that was in Detroit.
Mm.
And this she's no longer alive, but it was handed down. And there's an amazing collection of work, beautiful figurative paintings and engravings that he did that are kind of, for a lot of people that see the film, a sort of a revelation to realize this masterful technique that Peter actually is capable of. But he turned his back on that to just be more expressive and spontaneous with color.
Interesting. So how about yourself? Have you been a fan of painting for a while?
Well, I, I don't really know art, but I know what I
Yeah,
like, I guess,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
um, yeah, that's not how I came to the subject really.
Right.
I, but I love Peter's painting. Actually, the more I see it, and I should say that the stuff he's been doing in the last year, couple years since I stopped filming, it's just even more beautiful than some of the things I saw him doing in 2020. It's just amazing. And he never repeats himself, which is fantastic. Uh, and I think one of the reasons people really um, like the film, people that don't know anything about art, is that number one, when Peter talks about it, it's with a complete lack of pretense. He just does it. It's like a craft to him, and that's
Mm,
just what you do. And the paint does what it does, and he's got his ideas. But
mhm,
he doesn't get into art speak about it and have these,
mhm,
philosophical ideas that you're trying to interpret on the canvas. And because it's purely abstract, you can just, it's just all on the surface. So you don't have to know anything or look for hidden messages. Um, and yeah, so it's great. And it's also great now to know that Peter has regained success since I stopped filming. While I was
That's
editing,
fantastic.
he's been rediscovered as you might say, and is represented by a Karma Gallery in New York. And
Okay.
his paintings are selling globally now, and
Wow.
for a lot of money, which
Wow.
is amazing. Yeah, yeah.
But
Some of the
he's not going to New York City to chop it up.
No, I mean he
Yeah.
went down there. There was an opening. His first solo show in New York since 1976 was
Damn.
in 2021 in October, and he went down for that, which was great. And
Yeah.
but unfortunately he won't be going out to Utah for the premiere. He's really just not traveling anymore. He's 82 now and slowing down a bit from when
Yeah.
I filmed him. But he's always in great spirits and is working every day still. Yeah.
So tell people about the premiere.
Uh, Slamdance premiere the in-person screenings Sunday the 22nd at 12:45, and then again on Tuesday the 24th at 5:30 at the Treasure Mountain in location. And for $7.99, you can get yourself a virtual pass to the whole festival on the Slamdance website, so you can watch my film and a lot of other wild looking movies. I tell you, I'm really looking forward just to going and watching films and meeting some of these filmmakers. You know, looking at the list, it looks like I really feel like my film is the most conservative bit of filmmaking
Oh,
included in Slamdance, just from the descriptions. Um, so it's going to be a lot of fun, and I'm very honored to be included. And
yeah.
hopefully, this will set us on a good course for for the life of the film and reaching audiences.
Yeah. Hopefully so. Yeah. So would you say there was like a documentary manifesto or style you try to bring to this particular piece of work?
That's a good question. Not really, although
Mm,
for me, like with certain projects, I like to sort of come up with a style guide or kind of a little bit of set of rules of what I want
mhm,
to try and do. And from the beginning with this film, I really wanted I wanted not to draw attention to what I was doing at all. And so as much as I could, I left the camera on a tripod, either locked off or just moving to catch different shots. There is some handheld work in there, a little bit of slow motion handheld in some sections, but generally I took a very conservative approach to it so that it would I don't know, it just felt rooted. Peter's so rooted in this environment of his property, and the whole film takes place either in his house, in his yard, or in a shipping container
mhm.
trailer where it was his studio at the time. And it just felt like the right thing to do, just to kind of have this patience and just sit there and be with Peter and let things happen.
Interesting. And for if you're trying to convert uh people to being art fans, what would you say is like some good reasons to start to on even just like a surface level appreciate the fine arts a little bit more?
Well, art, it's so subjective.
Mm,
I think, like me, everybody knows what they like and what they don't like.
mhm, mhm,
What I hope is that one of the takeaways from the film for anybody watching it is just that they are inspired to make something. I think
mm,
it's a celebration of this very human thing we do of creative expression, and so to me it's just inspiring. And particularly when I was filming Peter, he was really painting for painting's sake. There was nobody wanting to buy the paintings for the most part. It's just what he does, and
mhm,
it's his work that he did every day. So that's the other thing, is to you know it takes that diligence and work ethic of doing something every day to master it.
mm.
And it's a good thing he was doing that for all those years, because when the market came back around to find him, he was ready. He had a stack of paintings, like 2 feet high, ready to go.
Good to go. All right. Well, Alex, thank you very much for your time. I really enjoyed it. I watched this on a nice, mellow Sunday morning over a couple of cups of coffee. It was a
Yeah,
very nice way to settle in and launch my day. So
yeah.
thank you for this piece of work, and lots of luck at Slamdance. I think people are going to dig it. Is there a final word you would like to end on?
No, just thank you for your interest. And yeah, it's a very relaxing experience to watch the film. I think that's another thing I like about it. Kind of settle in with Peter. And yeah, I just look forward to getting people's feedback. It's going to be exciting.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for your time.
All right, bye-bye.
Thanks, Mike.